Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Free Market Foundation channel. For regular watchers, this is Zakelem Timber. I'm sure you know the face really from all the videos I've made talking about all things liberty. Today we are launching one of our, papers as part of the Liberty First project. And as you know, the Liberty First project is a project that we've been conducting here at the Free Market Foundation, which pretty much provides solutions to the various problems that we have here in South Africa, right? Ranging from regulatory problems and in the context of today, monetary problems too. For those of you who don't know, you can find out everything you want to know about the Liberty First project at libertyfirst.co.za. And today we are talking about David Ansara's paper. The paper is State Proof Money, the case for Bitcoin adoption in South Africa. And well, if any one of you are aware, I am an anarchist. So really anything that says state proof yourself is always amazing. And in the context of South Africa, you have to think about this. We have a state that has grown over the years in scope, right? Its reach is growing, but its ability to deliver basic services is diminishing. So we are getting little and little return for a state that is growing bigger and bigger. And as you've seen in South Africa, really as a natural response, you've had individuals just respond to this in the best way that they can, right? By getting private services, by going off grid in terms of electricity and water, and in various other ways, right? In security and other manners. And today we are talking about how you can do that, how you can state proof yourself really in the monetary sense. How can we do this? And the paper written by our CEO extraordinaire, David Ansara, says that you have to adopt Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the best case you have really in trying to protect yourself against the excesses of the state when it comes to all things money. But that is enough from my side. I think David is in a better position to expand more on his paper. David, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much, Zakes. And I'm very happy to be presenting this paper as part of our Liberty First series. And I think this combines two of my passions, which is state proofing and Bitcoin. So I'm really thrilled to be the author of this paper. I had a lot of fun doing it. All right, so what I'll do is I'm going to be just going through some of the core arguments of the paper. And I think that'll be useful for a general discussion that we'll have just a little bit later in the stream, Zakes, and I'd encourage our audience to submit questions whilst we go along, and Zakes will facilitate that a little bit later. All right, so basically the paper argues that Bitcoin can serve as a very powerful tool for state proofing in South Africa, and state proofing is really a strategy for resisting hostile government policies and also mitigating against the effects of state failure. So we'll start by just kind of understanding and unpacking this idea of state proofing and particularly its application to the realm of money. We'll look at this idea of sound money. We'll also delve a bit more deeply into Bitcoin itself, looking at some of its properties. And we'll also then take a bit of a step back as well, just to look at the context in South Africa politically and economically, and some of the threats to sound money that exist in South Africa. We'll also touch on some cautionary tales from abroad. And then we'll look at how Bitcoin adoption strategies can express in different ways, and how Bitcoin can help to mitigate against some of the threats to sound money that we will be speaking about. All right, so when we look at this idea of state proofing, it's a strategy that we at the Free Market Foundation have championed for many years. It was an idea developed first by the business group Sakelicha. It's a response to both government hostility, but also incapacity. I think Zakes really spoke to that paradox that we experience here in South Africa, that we have this ever-expanding state, a very large public sector workforce, a very large remit, this huge cabinet. The government tries to do more and more things, but it's lost its ability to look after the fundamentals, the preservation of life, liberty, and property. And a lot of the policy agenda, as we've spoken about frequently in our work at the Free Market Foundation, unfortunately, is very much still rooted in a statist and socialist ideology, which undermines economic freedom. That's really what the Liberty First project more broadly seeks to achieve, is to maximize economic freedom. The more economic freedom you have, the closer that correlates with economic growth, with human flourishing, and quality of life. And so South Africa is sitting around the middle of that Economic Freedom of the World Index, which is the annual index that we co-publish with the Fraser Institute. We're about 83rd out of 165 countries in terms of our freedom status. So a lot of the policy framework in South Africa, it's an excessively regulatory state. There are threats towards private property rights and restrictions on free enterprise. We want to push that back. But like I was mentioning, the state also fails to deliver basic services like water, electricity, and security, which has the effect of raising costs and inefficiencies for businesses. That's obviously negative. But I think there's also, amidst this failure, there are opportunities for private actors to reclaim power back from the state. And I think that weakness of the state provides such an opportunity. So, for example, when the country is reliant on Eskom and it starts to lose its capacity to provide power, the private sector can come in with solar solutions and other solutions to kind of mitigate the effects of state failure and actually decouple from that dependency on the government monopoly. Private security can help to offset the state's monopoly on force, for example. So our argument here at the Free Market Foundation is that individuals, firms, and communities must self-organize voluntarily to fill some of these voids. And one of the themes that really characterizes the misgovernance in South Africa is this very high tendency towards centralization in Pretoria. This concentrates political power, it creates zero-sum thinking, it creates a kind of patronage-driven politics, but it also stifles the ability for local actors to provide solutions at that localized level. South Africa is an enormous country. It's twice the size of France in terms of its territory. So it's basically the size of Western Europe. It's an extremely heterogeneous society with very different and unique challenges, lots of different kind of cultural, linguistic, and ethnic groups. And decentralization really offers a framework with which we can address some of the problems in our society. So themes like privatization of state-owned assets, a greater embrace of federalism. We have argued in our campaign for Home Rule that South Africa has this fantastic federal architecture, but we don't have a political culture of federalism. So we need local authorities to start seizing power back from the center. We need bottom-up initiatives like neighborhood associations, community business groups that can use the tools available to them to actually solve some of these problems themselves. So the counter to centralization is obviously decentralization, which reduces that risk concentration, it boosts transparency and accountability, and it's more responsive in terms of the political system. I think that's a general framework that I think we like to apply to this very complicated place called South Africa. So another theme is permissionless innovation. So state proofing doesn't require that you now go and seek the permission of the government. So for example, if there's a privatization program, yes, that's good. But if you wait long enough, then our infrastructure is going to collapse, our safety and security issues are going to magnify. So, time is not on our side. We need people who have high agency, who are willing to solve problems without waiting necessarily for authority to be granted to them by the center. So those higher principles, those constitutional principles of life, liberty, and property, the things that the state ought to be protecting and is not, in the absence of that authority, we need individuals, firms, community groups to kind of step into the breach. And you have a higher constitutional duty to do so. So when the national government of Pretoria implements expropriation without compensation or black economic empowerment, these are an affront to the constitutional principles of private property rights and black economic and non-racialism, for example. So pushing back there, I think, is legitimate and you have that higher constitutional duty to do so. So when we apply this principle of state proofing to money, that really means reducing government control over the monetary system, and also trying to find tools for creating financial sovereignty, for creating independence from the state. So money, I think, is really vital for our ability to store and exchange value, to engage in commerce. And when you manipulate and distort the money supply, that can affect prices, that can erode wealth via inflation. So as Friedrich Hayek argued, we have a portrait of Hayek on our library wall. And he was a strong advocate for denationalizing money, which preserves independence. So ultimately, when we think of state proofing, and we'll get into sound money and Bitcoin in just a sec, when we think of state proofing, really it starts with a mindset of taking responsibility, not waiting for the people who created the problems to come along and solve the problems. It's about solving problems yourself and finding the tools and the mechanisms with which to do so. My belief is that Bitcoin is one such tool. There's a saying that says, fix the money, fix the world. And I've got a little sticker here, which reiterates that. I think the world's a complicated place. I think money is a very important part of that. I think if you fix the money, you'll fix the money problems, and you'll fix a lot of other problems. But yeah, as you'll see from our Liberty First series, there are a lot of other domains in which we need to exert our energy and apply this principle of freedom. Okay, so sound money is crucial for economic freedom. What are the qualities of sound money, of hard, good, strong money? It must be scarce, first of all. So that is important for not devaluing the supply. So when, as Zex would tell you, if you introduce new money into the system without a commensurate rise in productivity, you're going to now debase and devalue the value of that money. So in a fiat system, where government basically can, by decree, introduce new money into the system, and to save. So sound money, in addition to being scarce, must also be durable. Like if you think of gold, gold is basically invincible. So a gold coin, you can melt it down, you can blow it up, and you'll still be able to kind of put it together again. Money must be portable. So I think in some ancient societies, they use these, big carved stones in kind of some of these Pacific Island communities. Those weren't very portable. But a gold coin or a seashell, that is portable. Money must be divisible and it must be fungible. So historically, and we go into this in the paper, money was backed by a commodity like gold or silver with fixed supplies that was independent of government control. So it had its own intrinsic value. So today's fiat currencies, by contrast, they rely purely on government trust and authority, which has the tendency to create unchecked monetary printing, like what we saw during the 2008 global financial crisis and also the COVID crisis in the 2020s. So the benefits of sound money include lowering inflation, which I've mentioned, and inflation is effectively an expropriation of savings, because the value of what you have saved diminishes. Sound money also has very beneficial effects on incentives. So it enforces governments to be much more fiscally prudent and to prioritize their spending more carefully. It makes them less dependent on borrowings and so reduces debt. And it also encourages what we would call a low time preference. So that means that you, instead of focusing on the immediate expenditure needs and instant gratification, you make investments for the long term. All right, so those are really the principles of sound money. So I think in this next portion of the talk, we'll look at how Bitcoin really stacks up as a version or as a as an example of sound money. So Bitcoin was launched in 2009 amidst the aftermath of the global financial crisis. It's the first decentralized digital currency. It's now valued at about $1 trillion in terms of its market capitalization. So it has that benefit of being the first mover. There are many other cryptocurrencies. I don't like to really refer to Bitcoin as cryptocurrency because I think many other cryptocurrencies give it a bad name. Um, Essentially, it's a peer-to-peer network which uses blockchain technology to create new coins, but I'll get into some of that production process just now. It's transparent, so the open ledger is viewable by anybody, and it's borderless, which enables for secure transactions across borders without financial intermediaries. So that I think is very important, particularly in our kind of digital economy where there are a lot of gatekeepers, a lot of restrictions on free trade, like, for example, currency controls and exchange controls. All right, so just in terms of some of the features of Bitcoin, it's decentralized, so there is no central bank or any government backing whatsoever for the currency. So this is fantastic in that it makes it resistant to some of the temptations to interfere or to boost the money supply. Governments cannot do that. And there is I won't go into it in too much detail, but there is a mining process which is hard coded into the protocol. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin in circulation. About 95% of all Bitcoin has already been mined, and so and because of the open ledger, it's very difficult to, or it's impossible to manipulate the money supply. So I think also Bitcoin is censorship resistant. It's separation of money from the state, and many other digital currencies have a central committee or a team of developers that really are potentially a failure point, or could potentially be targeted by state authorities. Bitcoin is diffuse. It is basically a network, so it's impossible to it's impossible to target individuals or to shut down the network or to manipulate it in that way. So I spoke about the halvings and the reduction in the prices for mining, but I think what's very important about the stable supply is that there's a high stock to flow ratio, which means the introduction of new coins. Like if you think of gold mining, the ratio of all the existing gold that is in the world versus new supply, that's about 1.5%. So every year the supply gets about 1.5% bigger. So that gives you that kind of stability and certainty. So Bitcoin is similar in that sense. So it's immune to some of the kind of monetary printing that we saw in 2008 and during the COVID crisis as well, which led to inflation spikes. I'll go into the paper and some of those numbers, and I think there's quite a lot of consensus there about those inflationary effects. So I mentioned the censorship-resistant qualities of Bitcoin. Because it's distributed across these global nodes, it's very hard to shut it down or to limit access. The only way you can do that is to cut the internet, as what happened in Iran recently during those protests. But even then, there are workarounds. And so Bitcoin is really ideal for dissidents, pro-democracy activists. We've seen this in places like Russia, Hong Kong, Nigeria, and given the digital nature of our monetary systems now, actually for authoritarian regimes, it is a lot easier today to freeze bank accounts, to choke off the funds of groups that might be seen as a challenge to the supremacy of government authority. So in that way, Bitcoin has the fluidity and the speed of digital currencies without some of those other risks. So Alex Gladstein of the Human Rights Foundation calls Bitcoin freedom money, and he points out that 80% of the world is still living under authoritarian regimes. So in that sense, it is really, really critical. So this question that I raise in the report, is Bitcoin a form of sound money? I would say yes. It's a strong store of value. Many people refer to it as digital gold. It's portable. It's non-degradable. It's also increasingly being used as a medium of exchange. So it is also divisible into satoshis. 100 million satoshis equals one Bitcoin. I think one of its shortcomings is as a unit of account because of price volatility. And a lot of people, I think, kind of obsess over the price metric. I don't think that that's necessary to do so. But yes, the price volatility does mean that as a unit of account, it can sometimes be quite unwieldy. All right, so in terms of threats to sound money in South Africa, maybe Zakes and I can get into this a little bit more in the chat. But really, as I point out in the paper, South Africa has a strong tradition of central bank independence, and it's constitutionally mandated that the SARB the South African Reserve Bank, must protect the rand's value. But ultimately, as I point out in the paper, and I think Zakes has also made this argument in some of his columns more recently, is that ultimately a central bank is a creature of the state. So you can have, it is created by statute. There is private ownership of the central bank. That is fairly anomalous in terms of a global precedent. There are only about 11 central banks in the world that have private shareholding, as the SARB does. But ultimately, and Zakes pointed this out to me in one of our chats, you can't just go as a private actor and start your own central bank. It's underpinned by the constitutional and legislative authority of the state. Nevertheless, there are growing calls for nationalization of the SARB from the likes of the EFF, but also the ANC as well. At its policy conference in 2022, the ANC specifically adopted a policy resolution to take steps towards nationalizing, taking ownership. And I think maybe some people might say, okay, well, would that have a substantive effect? It wouldn't change the constitutional mandate of the bank. But I think it sends a very worrying signal of a kind of an impatience with independent institutions and authorities, and also a very explicit push for looser monetary policy, supposedly pro-poor monetary policy, which in our view would actually increase the risk of inflation and even hyperinflation, as we've seen in countries like Zimbabwe. And I think really that's a push by statist government actors to loosen monetary policy in order to engage in much greater degrees of state spending. But South Africa, as I point out, is not the only country which has these pressures. Even in the United States, we saw this month the Federal Reserve chairman coming under immense pressure. He's being criminally investigated for renovations that he authorized to Federal Reserve buildings. And he alleges that this is part of a pressure campaign by the Trump administration to basically lower interest rates. So all around the world, not just here in Africa, we are seeing a kind of an impatience with central bank independence. And I think that there are some real dangers there of monetary easing and debasement of currencies. So in terms of the monetary system in South Africa, we look at inflation. So inflation target has been revised downwards, which is a good thing, from between 3 to 6% to now 3%. But as Zakes again has argued, the real true target should be 0% to fully protect the value of the currency. So even when you're saying 3% target, you're basically saying our target is to debase the currency by 3%. It shouldn't be called the inflation rate. It should be called the debasement rate. And so our belief, and I articulate this in the report, is that Bitcoin potentially provides a hedge against inflation. So I mentioned some of the civil liberties components of sound money. So in terms of privacy, this rise in electronic payments has also seen a rise in government mandates around information gathering. So FICA, know your customer criteria. These mandates really erode financial privacy, anti-money laundering, and that heightens the degree of state surveillance over how you use money. I mean, in the People's Republic of China, money accounts have been linked to social scores. So, if you misbehave or threaten government authority in some way, you could be deprived of access to your own funds. So that really undermines the sovereignty of money. So Bitcoin is not entirely, it doesn't offer true anonymity. It's more pseudonymity. So all the transactions are transparent, but the user addresses that are used, those are alphanumeric codes. But when you link that to your identity, then your identity could be revealed because of the visibility of the open ledger. So some people get around that in different ways. And many people say, Bitcoin is used for illicit flows and illicit financing. I think any currency can be used for illicit activity. I think 99% of all criminal activity is probably funded using fiat money, and particularly the US dollar. But in some ways, that transparency that Bitcoin offers is actually a very important tool for countering criminal activity as well. So that's a double-edged sword. So I won't go into it in too much detail here, but we also have some cautionary tales. We look at Venezuela as well as Iran. Both of these countries have engaged in excessive monetary printing, have imposed price controls. In Venezuela, that was a wide-scale socialist experiment. But I mean, their monetary printing resulted in inflation of up to 345,000% in 2019. There was also, nationalization of oil and a lot of subsidies and free goodies for the populace. And in order to fund that, they engaged in excessive monetary printing. What was the result? The immiseration and impoverishment of millions of people, 8 million people fleeing the country, many people, resorting to desperate measures like rummaging through garbage to try and find food. The situation in Iran, inflation in December was up to about 42% last year, about 72% food inflation. And actually the catalyst, the trigger, was merchants in the bazaars of Tehran and other places basically protesting against this, and that led to an escalation in the violent uprising. And so what we've seen actually is Bitcoin being used in both of these examples by people in Iran. There's something like $7.8 billion US worth of Bitcoin adoption, and a lot of people using self-custody solutions to try and de-link themselves from the Iranian rial. But interestingly enough, in both of these cases, the IRGC in Iran, the Chavistas in Venezuela, have also bought Bitcoin and have huge holdings and have used that to try and bypass sanctions. So, it's an interesting example of the neutrality of Bitcoin, that it can be used by states themselves as well as citizens trying to resist state power. All right, so getting back to the South African situation, I mean, I think in the paper, we look at three different levels: the individual, the transactional, and also the corporate usage of Bitcoin. So really, one of our recommendations, and I stress that the FMF is not a financial services provider. You should speak to an accredited financial professional when you make investment decisions. But I think there's a lot of wisdom in allocating a portion of your portfolio to Bitcoin as a hedge against rand inflation. Inflation might seem pretty low at the moment, might seem like a low probability risk, but if inflation runs away, that can be devastating for your long-term asset protection. So there is a rise in exchanges such as Valor or Luno. And this is useful for as on-ramps to Bitcoin for especially first-time users. But ultimately, what you want to do is invest in a hardware wallet, a self-custodied solution where there's a phrase in the Bitcoin world, not your key, not your Bitcoin. So that is really the most important tool for exercising sovereignty over your money. So at the transactional level, and we had an event here last year at the Free Market Foundation offices in Joburg at Northwood's House, we had a number of talks about just the proliferation of retail outlets, coffee shops, restaurants, filling stations, particularly in the Western Cape, that are actually using Bitcoin on a day-to-day basis as a medium of exchange. So there are services like Money Badger, and they've partnered with other organizations like Pick and Pay, like Bootlegger Coffee, and other like SnapScan, or Zapper, other entities to integrate with other kind of payment systems. And so we're seeing a kind of a rise in everyday usage. Then at the corporate level, the most notable international example of a company that is holding Bitcoin as part of its treasury strategy is MicroStrategy. They've bought a whopping $62 billion worth of Bitcoin. But then here in South Africa, the African Bitcoin Corporation, formerly AltX, they've also adopted a formal Bitcoin reserve strategy. And they're also offering financial products which enable retail customers to be able to invest in AltX shares, which is part of their ecosystem, and in that way getting indirect exposure to Bitcoin. So if you're not comfortable holding it yourself, some of these other intermediaries can also offer a way of getting exposure. So I think just to close this off, sound money really underpins freedom. Fiat money risks manipulation and debasement, as we saw in Venezuela and Iran. And I think Bitcoin, as a decentralized, scarce, and censorship-resistant form of money, gives you that state-proof quality. It's a hedge against inflation, which is a direct consequence of government action. It's a way to uphold your civil liberties. And I would encourage South Africans to adopt it on an individual basis, to use it in a transactional way, and for corporates to also explore a corporate Bitcoin treasury solution. So let's embrace this tool for a freer future. Thank you.
Nice. Thank you for the great presentation, David. I mean, I've already knew quite a bit about Bitcoin given the space that I am in, but it was nice thinking about it within the context of like an alternative, right? In the world of Saifid and Amus, I guess, an assurance policy, but now we are actually actualizing it. So it's not necessarily insurance anymore when it's being actualized, since you're state proofing, or you're advocating for state proofing yourself in the immediate, no permission, something that is very attractive to me as someone who loves freedom, right? The ability to protect yourself from the state, to do something that ensures that whatever actions any central authority takes regarding, this minimum exchange that you use, you aren't affected, or at least you aren't affected as much as you would be. So I think that was a great presentation, and a nice mentioning too about, the inherent threats, right? You said the guy from the Human Rights Foundation called it freedom money because 80% of the world still lives under dictatorships. And I think this is something, particularly as people advocate for freedom in general, we tend to forget, right? This is one of the greatest things about Bitcoin, right? It is neutral. It is neutral, as you kept on saying. It is used by the dissidents and it is used by the states themselves. So I guess this is the beauty of freedom. It is quite beautiful to see. But to everyone watching, please, the link to the paper is posted in the chat. If you, well, please go and like take a look at it. It is a great paper that is, particularly premised in like the South African context, given the challenges that we do have with state delivery in South Africa, and the low probability but high impact possibility, right, of like the Reserve Bank not necessarily being as independent as it now currently is. So please do go and check out the paper and check out everything on the Liberty First site, libertyfirst.co.za. Again, there you'll see all various solutions that we have as the Free Market Foundation to the myriad of problems that are faced by South Africans. And there seems to have been, a nice discussion on the chat really about the hard cap of 21 million concerning Bitcoin. I think Nico was mentioning how it wasn't always 21 million, but I think he has been corrected by another member of the chat where they mentioned that, the 21 million hard cap in Bitcoin was, baked in from the Bitcoin protocol. I think from its genesis, since it began, it hasn't been changed, it hasn't been altered whatsoever. But I may be wrong. But another member of the chat has seemingly mentioned that the 21 million hard cap, what makes it non-inflationary has always been a central feature of it ever since it came out. So yeah, that was pretty cool. But an interesting question really from Nico, which is a bit of pushback, right? As I was listening to this, because full disclosure, I'm a bit of a gold bug, right? I fall more on the gold side of things than the Bitcoin side of things. And in general, right, I think the biggest drawback to I think making Bitcoin mass adoptable is the fact that it is quite involved, right? Nico raises a very fundamental point. If there's no power, there's no money, right? Like, so I find this to be a very interesting point. When you have no power, you have no money, which to a degree would be true, right? If you don't have some element of the internet or access to the internet, don't have access to your money. If you don't have electrical power, you don't have access to your money. And then we live in a continent that experiences these problems quite frequently. If you look at it at a continental wide scale, maybe in South Africa, it might be quite different, but with the power aspect, we have experienced that too. And then, and combining this question with my general context of like, the technical capabilities one needs to really be able to participate in Bitcoin, right? As you said, there are retail solutions that like Luno that make it easier for customers, for technological noobs, for lack of a better term, that do not know anything about technology, but they can get into Bitcoin. But as you said, to really participate and be part of the Bitcoin ecosystem, you have to be tech savvy, and no other form of medium of exchange is really as necessitates that much technical know-how. So really, what is your response to that, right? The general technological premising of this, extricating yourself from the states. Also, notwithstanding the fact that the world is probably going to get even more technologically centered. So yeah.
Zex, maybe I don't know if you can change your mic, but I think I'm getting a bit of disruption on your mic.
On my
But
end. Okay.
yeah, it's kind of crackling a little bit. But yeah, so I think in terms of the power issue, I mean, I think that's a valid point. I would say that's a fairly low risk in terms of the kind of that doesn't that affects you on a localized level. So, for example, I mean, the internet's another case. Like if your government, as we saw in Uganda or Tanzania recently, if there are shutdowns of the internet due to instability and protest, yes, that impedes your ability to use that currency in the short term, but that doesn't take away your assets. We've like even in a country like Canada during COVID, during the truckers' protests against the Trudeau government. I think somebody in the chat actually, yeah, I think it was Ralph, said the shocking communist shutdown of bank accounts by Trudeau is a clarion warning to us all. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. So there was a legitimate democratic protest against vaccine mandates by truckers, but then they were very quickly deemed to be in breach of, they were seen as a threat to national security. And so anti-money laundering and terrorism financing legislation was invoked to basically shut down the crowdsourcing campaigns of these groups. So to me, that seems to be a much more present and higher risk than kind of power outages. I mean, interestingly enough, um, in Uganda recently during some of the protests, uh, some users were even able to use Bluetooth technology to connect their devices to one another. So even when the national internet infrastructure was down, they were able to bypass that. And of
Oh,
course, services like Starlink as well provide satellite internet technology. I know I'm kind of speaking about internet connectivity now. But yeah, so yeah, look, you can never be totally insulated from all risks, and like I said, Bitcoin, I think, is one tool in your arsenal. So just in terms of the technological nature, so I'm not the most technologically savvy person myself, but I think it is incumbent on you, if you value your wealth and you want to preserve it, to take responsibility. And that is one of the principles of the state proofing mindset, is actually taking responsibility for problems. So, but there's also the beauty of a market economy, which has an emergent quality where entrepreneurs, profit-seeking entrepreneurs, are providing services that enable you to get access and exposure. So I would encourage you to read the report and kind of look at some of these third-party intermediaries, like the exchanges. I would say the exchanges are a good way to start, like Valo or Luno, because that kind of gives you that access, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. But obviously, not your key, not your Bitcoin. Whilst these entities are subject to regulatory oversight and they have reputations to guard, ultimately that isn't specifically your Bitcoin that you are holding. You are somebody is holding it on your behalf. So if you want true sovereignty, then I would encourage you to do the hard work of becoming more familiar with it. So yeah, it is a learning curve, but yeah, as the Bitcoiners say, you got to spend your 100 hours. I see. Yeah, there's lots of other questions, so maybe we can
yep,
get
yep,
to some
yep,
of
yep.
those.
Let's
Vivek.
get to some of those. And let's get to one from Radio Nouvelle. He says he's a fan of, or she is a fan of, of blockchain technology to counter corruption, right? Be it with Bitcoin or something else. But the concern with, Bitcoin is that it is not backed by anything, similar to fiat currencies, I assume is what they meant. But this is, I mean, pretty much took it the words right out of my mouth, right? The major problem with Bitcoin is that it seems to suffer from the same problem that it critiques fiat currencies of. Maybe you'd like to, tackle that thing.
Yeah. So look, I would stress that fiat currency is not backed by anything either. It's backed by the coercive power of the state.
Yes, and we're saying that's the problem. That
Yes.
is the problem. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I think in terms of Bitcoin, the value is in the trust and the utility that people invest in it. So whilst it might not be backed by a another hard commodity like gold or silver, it has utility and properties that that give it that that soundness. I mean, I think the ability to transact digitally, I think the scarcity component of it, that it is fixed supply, I think is very powerful. That there are no trusted third parties as well. It is intrinsic to the network. So you're not going to have the same problems of it being manipulated and adjusted or tweaked. The Bitcoin protocol is hard coded, so it cannot be changed unless with a majority of users decide to do it. And there have been kind of forks and splits in the protocol, and now we're in the terrain where my technical knowledge breaks down. But those are kind of in the early days. I see James Core is listening on the stream. He's from Simple B, so he'd probably be better able to tell me about that. But yeah, I think the immutability of it, the fact that the supply is known and fixed, I think is where the value lies. And it's how you value it. If somebody provides you with a good or a service and they're prepared to take Bitcoin, then there is value there. They're willing to trust that currency. So yeah, so trust is a very big component of it. But when the government says to you, just trust us, but then they start to dramatically increase the supply of money. I think something like 40% of all US dollars have been printed since 2020 in circulation, in total circulation. I think that shows you where some of those risks lie.
Okay. Thank you for that. There seem to be a whole lot of gold bugs in our chat, which makes me very happy. There's a few Bitcoin adopters, but that is also here's an answer from Simply B, who says Bitcoin is backed by energy, which I guess should make for a very interesting discussion in and of itself, right? But
Yeah,
great,
no,
thank you,
that's
for
a
the
good
answer.
point, because you have to expel energy in order to produce it. That there is resistance. So you can't, if you think of with monetary printing and like something like quantitative easing, that was just a few clicks of a mouse and adding some extra points to a balance sheet. Whereas Bitcoin requires proof of work. So you have to expend energy, and that, in a way, is its connection with the material world. So yeah, thank you, James. I think that's a good answer. So
Yeah.
I'd like to speak about about gold, because I think I'm also quite bullish on gold. You see, I've got my gold tie on, and
Yeah.
gold has the benefit of a 4,000-year head start on Bitcoin. And I think what's also interesting is to see the rise in the gold price. I think it touched $5,000 recently, I think even this week, which I think underscores the point which a lot of Bitcoiners have been making, which is that trust in the fiat system is actually breaking down. What's driving a lot of that gold price surge, I believe, is central banks acquiring gold as a reserve asset, which I think is very ironic, since the central banks themselves are the supreme authorities of the fiat system. And like I was joking with Zex earlier, it's kind of gold for us, but fiat for the rest of you. And I think China, both in terms of the government purchases of gold, although they don't disclose how much gold they've actually purchased, but also Chinese citizens who, there are capital controls, exchange controls on Chinese money. You've seen a lot of Chinese people, wealthy people, buying properties in Toronto or London as a way of hedging themselves against the Chinese financial system. That's a lot of the reason why they're buying gold as well. I think I would say that it's not a mutually exclusive conversation. I think if somebody gave me a gold coin, I would be very, very happy about that. So I'm not saying that gold has no function. I think it's it has that intrinsic quality that I was speaking about earlier. It is also scarce. It is also hard to destroy. I think divisibility and portability, I think, are very important qualities that and advantages that Bitcoin has. So we live in a digital world now, and the ability to transact across borders instantaneously, I think, is very important and very powerful. And I think gold lacks that kind of divisibility and that digital component. I think some of the risks that we spoke around the digital system around surveillance, privacy, and also having the risk of having your funds choked off. I think that is a disadvantage of our digital money world. But if you think of this broadcast can be viewed anywhere in the world with a YouTube account or on X, I can take a picture with my phone and send it to somebody on the other side of the world instantly, and yet we can't engage in international payments without exorbitant cost and inefficiency and a lot of barriers to entry and a lot of regulatory approvals. And anybody who's tried to send money around the world would know that that's very difficult to do. So Bitcoin, I think, has many of the advantages of digital currency without some of the drawbacks of fiat. So I think that it plays in its own unique category.
Yeah, no, it is. It is. It deserves a separate discussion by itself, right? Then I'll put on my gold bug hat, and it would have to be a different paper about the viability of gold and Bitcoin. But for now, really, I think the takeaway is, as you say, it isn't a mutually exclusive proposition, right? It isn't a dichotomy. You can really have both, but as the paper argues for Bitcoin adoption, I think the greatest takeaway that we can have from that, right, why Bitcoin is great really for anyone who loves freedom like myself, is that it is permissionless. It is an ability to have, something that exists outside of the state apparatus without any need for like state approval, state application, no need for a form to fill out, anything, right? You can start transacting outside of the system that is quite flawed for the reasons that we have outlined, and we did not even go through all of them. So I think that should be the greatest takeaway really from gold bugs and Bitcoin adopters alike, is that really that what makes Bitcoin so great is that you don't need permission. With gold, having a certain amount of gold, if the state gets to know about it, it will probably get you into trouble and all of those things. But there are benefits too. But with Bitcoin, and it is just there,
Yeah, I mean, if you
ready
think
to be
of
adopted.
under FDR in the 1930s, they just banned individuals from holding gold.
That's
So
true. That is the possibility. And it would be much more harder for the reasons you've mentioned, right? Since Bitcoin is digital and since it's a peer-to-peer network, right? Banning the internet itself is not enough. As you mentioned, in some instances, you can use Bluetooth and really transfer funds to another person. So it is a great thing to have for freedom lovers all the world. I understand, and I love that it is called freedom money. So yeah, that would be it, I think, from us. And on our end, David has delivered what I think was a pretty important, conversation on the monetary side of things, a monetary solution as part of our broader solutions in the Liberty First project, and his paper, State Proof Money, the case for Bitcoin adoption in South Africa, is available. Here's the link in the chat. And really, please do go and read it. It is quite a good read. And even if you disagree with, Bitcoin adoption in general, I'm sure you'll, come out of it having gained some wonderful insights. But yeah, that'll be it from me. Maybe David will, if he has some last thoughts, and I'll hand it over to him, and then that will be it from us.
Oh, great, Zex. Thank you very much for facilitating this discussion and to everyone who joined us. But I think the most important thing is to recognize sound money is essential as the foundation for a free economy and also a free society. And I think it's very important that we don't just take money for granted, that we assume that just because the government is backing it, that it is somehow immune from some of the disasters that have befallen many other countries, and we've many examples around the world of money that has been debased and that has lost its value, whether it's closer to home here in Zimbabwe or in the examples that I gave in Iran and Venezuela. And I think the state-proof mentality is really critical for having a healthy skepticism towards government authority, and also seeking out, like you say, Zakes, permissionless sources of innovation. And what I would encourage you to do is have an open mind with Bitcoin and see it as, I think, part of a broader experiment of trying to identify how do we de-link ourselves and de-risk ourselves from this dependency on government money, and how do we create something that is suitable for our digital age, and which gives us agency and utility and enables us to focus on the real important work of productive economic value creation and exchange. And I think Bitcoin is a medium for that, and I'm really bullish about its future.
Amazing stuff. I'm a bit exposed to the Bitcoin, so bullish over here too, bullish over here. Kind of hedge your bets as much as you can. But thank you for joining us, ladies and gentlemen of the chat. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel to get more content like this. If you are interested in that stuff, please give the stream a like, or the video that will be uploaded over a like if you are watching this much more later. And really, that is it from our side. Go check out the Liberty First site again, libertyfirst.co.za. Find all the solutions really to South Africa's problems. We are ambitious like that, and we do deliver results if you do check out the content that is there. But yeah, that is it from our side. Stay free.